friends come over, another pastor here in town, his family came over the next day. I was telling him, man, I really want to get this zip line up, and I couldn't get it up. And he said, oh, man, I would love to come back. I got a ladder. Like, this sounds right up my alley. And I thought, all right, well, great, because I don't know what I'm doing. And so he came and he helped, and we were outside like all day, and he basically had to take everything down I'd already done. And then reset it back up. And so, but there was one thing, like there's this one tree that was near, it's a 100-foot zip line. And so like there's one tree that's about 70 feet down the path, and it's like 3 feet off the side of the zip line. And it was a huge pine tree. It's like 120-foot tall pine tree. And I'm just thinking, man, I hope I really don't have to take that thing down. And so I had to take like 10 other trees down. So I got those all down. And we had this thing run. Didn't want to take the pine tree down. So we get it set up. And my third daughter, Lainey, she's 7, and she has no fear. And so she's like, I'll do it first. Like, I'm first, right, Dad? And I'm like, yes, you are totally first. That sounds great, because I'm not trying it out. And so, like, I stick her on this thing, and, you know, there's, like, the unknowns, right? Like, is she going to hit the tree? Is she not going to hit the tree? I mean, I don't know. But it's one of those deals. Like, I asked the question before she leaves, you love Jesus, right? Yes. All right, see it, you know, and then she goes down, and then I'm like, we have insurance, right, babe? Yeah, okay, all right, have fun, lady. No, I'm just kidding, I didn't do that. But it was going to be fine. So, like, she goes down the course a couple of times, and she misses, like, she doesn't hit or anything. But this guy says, man, you know what, I have some real concerns about this tree here. Like, if I go home and somebody gets a concussion, I'm going to feel bad. And I'm like, well, if I don't, you shouldn't. But he insisted, and so he was like, well, I'll help you take it down. I've never taken down a tree this big before. Like, I have no clue what I'm doing. I have this little small chainsaw, and I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm doing, but if you want to do it, go for it. He's like, oh, yeah, I was in Boston, you know, like I cut 6 cords of wood every winter. Like, this is no big deal. Like, I love to fell trees. This would be fun for me. And so, like, he goes and he's tying off ropes and doing all kinds of stuff. He's like, oh, yeah, the bend of the tree is this way, and whatever. And I'm like, sounds good. Yeah, that's what I thought too, right? You know. There's so many unknowns about it, but like he cuts that thing down and it behemoths, boom, like just the whole ground shudders. And now the kids can go free down the course. Like life is easy and it's wonderful and it's great. And only one person has gotten hurt so far. It's amazing. And so here's the thing. Listen, when it comes to life, I think what many of us want in today's culture, it seems like we want an easy, no fear, peaceful life. It's like we want to control and manipulate our circumstances. If we just are good enough parents, we can protect our kids from ever having to endure any pain, any hardship, any trial. And I want to tell you, I don't really know that that's the best parenting solution, right? Like, well, if we can just micromanage this in our relationship, then everything will be okay. If we can take out all the unknown factors, then life is going to be fine. But I want to tell you, if you live long enough, you're going to know that you are not that strong. You're not that powerful. You're not that significant that you can control all of life to somehow micromanage it down to this manageable little thing and say, oh, look, I can create this great life. But that's what so many people are striving for. This next year, that's what people are going to spend their whole lives doing. They want to build their own little kingdom and protect their family and make sure it's this. And I don't know if you've ever been on Facebook, but like some of the conversation, I'm just saying, I've never thought of that in my life. Like there's fear and there's worry and there's all this stuff around the unknown. And I want to tell you, like, you can't always control your circumstances, but you can always control how you look at your circumstances. And so today I want us to look together at this passage from Matthew 2 so that we can see when God allows our plans to be ruined, when he allows destruction of your plans or of your life, when he permits that in your life, we have this choice of how we're going to look at our circumstances. And how your perspective means everything. I was talking out in the hallway. I said, boy, it's cold out here. Like, I was talking with one of the ushers, and he said, listen, I come from Vermont. Like, it's like -5. And I'm like, okay, that's perspective right there, right? Like, it's 30 outside here. It may be cold, but it's not -5. And so I think for us, when you go to this new year, your perspective means everything. How you look at your circumstance. You can't control everything that happens, but you can control with what you do with what happens, right? And so let's look at how they handled this. That Jesus is about 2 years old. Mary and Joseph have stayed in Bethlehem. And this is still part of the Christmas story. And you would think that it's going to be this sort of, okay, life is easy now. Now it's kind of the storybook. Like they're going to raise Jesus. It's going to be great. But little did they know there was something lurking around the corner. There were these threats and there were these legitimate fears. And they couldn't control those things, but what they could control was how they looked at their circumstances. So let's look at what it says. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who is what? Read it with me. What does it say? Where is he who has been what? Born. King of the Jews. We saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him. Now here they are. There's these guys. We don't know exactly where they're from. We don't know how many of them there were. We have the song, We Three Kings of Orient Art. Like, we don't know if there were three. We know they brought 3 different kinds of gifts. It could have been 10. It could have been 12. The Bible doesn't tell us. We don't know. But these were wise guys from another place. These were guys from Babylon or Persia. They followed the order of Daniel. Do you remember in the Old Testament, Daniel, he ascended to be one of the top wise men. He was one of the chief magicians. And so here was this guy, these guys, they come and they see this star, and somehow the Lord interprets that for them to say, a new king has been born. This is a significant event of this small little country that's much smaller than Persia, much smaller than Babylon. But you need to leave what you're doing now and take stuff and go and worship him. Now here's the thing. This was up to 1,000-mile journey. 1,000 miles to a place that they had probably never been. And they're going to worship a king who's not theirs. They had a king. They had a king of Persia. They had a king of Babylon. But like they're studying the stars, the Lord speaks to them somehow through that. Isn't that amazing? He chooses to speak through the stars. Like, and these guys say, this is a significant event. We got to go. Can you imagine telling that to your spouse? Well, how long will we be gone? At least 4 months. 4 months there, at least 4 months back. I don't know. So I'll see you in a year. Can you imagine what that would be like? Well, why are you going? Because a king has been born. Well, we have a king. I know, but he's like something different. I don't know. I don't know what's happening with this king. I don't know what exactly it all means. I just feel compelled. I've got to go. I've got to bring this king gifts. I've got to worship him. It could have been up to a year-long trip there and a year-long trip back. I mean, think about that. The cost invested in that. And they go. And so now they're standing before the star leads them to Israel. They go to the capital, Jerusalem. They're standing before King Herod. And what do they say? We're here to worship the one who is what? Been born, the king of the Jews. Well, guess what? That's not Herod. Herod wasn't born king. He was half Jewish, and he had ties to the Romans. And so they appointed him king. This guy was sinister. Like, he killed family members. He killed his wife. He ended up killing some of his sons. He was zealous for power all the time. And if anybody was going to take power away from him, he would kill him. And so here's this guy. He's half Jewish. He really hasn't been raised to know the prophecies about who the Messiah is going to be. But he's this king. And here are these guys standing before the actual king saying, we're here to find the newborn king because we're going to worship him, as they don't worship the current king. Can you imagine what kind of guts that took? And here's this guy, and he's like, what's going to happen? What's the king going to do? Look at what it says, verse 3. So when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled. This is a terrible translation. It literally means that it's chaos inside of him. Like, he was hungry for power. He was hungry for stability. He wanted to control everything. Like, have you ever been there? You ever felt like it's up to you to keep all the plates spinning? It's up to you to make sure everything happens. You got to micromanage it all. This is him. He's so worried he's going to lose power. Look what it says. And all Jerusalem was troubled. How? They were troubled with him. Because they knew when he gets upset, people die. And so look at what it says. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people. He inquired where the Christ was to be born. He didn't even know the scriptures. He's the king over these people. He doesn't even know the word. Look at what he says. Where's he to be born? They told him at Bethlehem of Judea. It's written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will be shepherd of my people Israel. And so here he is. He's like, wait a minute, there's going to be another king? It's going to be this Messiah. I thought that was all just myth stuff. I thought that was all just, people trying to start a rebellion. Like, I'm ready to squash any kind of rebellion there is, but you're saying there's going to be, where's it going to be born? Bethlehem. That's 5 miles from here. 5 miles from Jerusalem. And so everybody is upset. They don't know what's going to happen. What's the king going to do? He's already killed people because he thinks that they're going to receive power and take it from him. Now these guys are here, and they're saying, we're here to worship the one who was born king. We're here to worship the legitimate king. Not you, but we're here to worship the legitimate king, the one who's king over it all. Like, what's going to happen? And so look at what Herod does. Verse 7. So Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search, what does it say? Diligently for the child. And when you found him, bring me word so that I can come and worship him too. Does he have any intention of worship? No, he just wants to find out the location, but he doesn't want to do the dirty work. So he's like, all right, hey guys, come here. So here's what you're going to do. It's 5 miles away. You're so close. You've journeyed 1,000 miles. 5 miles, like, that's nothing, right? Like, that, you know how you feel when you're on a road trip? Like, anybody ever been to Disney World before? Did you drive, right? And then you're coming back. You see Rock Hill, and you're like, yes, Jesus, right? You know, it's like the kids won't kill each other in the last 45 minutes, all right? You're like, good to go. He says, you're 5 miles away. So you go find him, then come back and tell me exactly where he is, and then I'll go worship him too. Now look at what happens. Verse 9. After listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen, when it rose, it went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. Can you imagine how excited they are? Like, apparently the star has disappeared. Like, can you imagine you're following the star, right? Like, it's led you to the country, and then now it's gone. You're like, are you serious? We've come 1,000 miles. We've gone 4 months to a year of travel. Like, can you imagine what you smell like on the road after that long? You know what I'm saying? Like, this is crazy. Like, we've come this far, and now we don't know where to go. Like, this is nuts. That's why they go to the king anyway. And well, I don't know. Where is he? Where's the one who's been born king? And they come outside. Now the star's back. And this time it's like leading them. We don't know if they're the only ones who could see it. We don't know if they're the only ones who can interpret what it meant. We don't know, but somehow it leads them through Bethlehem. And it comes to rest over this one little humble house. Jesus' house. Jesus is this little toddler. No more than 2 years old. And he's in there playing around with his little tinker toys, right? That's what toddlers do. And look at what happens. I love this. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. And read this with me. What does it say? And they fell down and they worshiped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. I love this. Now listen, I've got 4 girls, right? I've had 4 toddlers, and they're worthy of some of the greatest moments of my life, but none of them are worthy of worship. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not bowing down at any of their feet. Like, it's not like, oh, you're amazing, let me worship you. Like, they can't do anything at 2, right? I mean, it's like you're still having to change them and clothe them, and they can sort of feed themselves, except they throw it all over you and they don't want it, right? Like, this is a toddler, right? I mean, this is a little infant running around. This is infant Jesus, and he's running around, and he's like, yay, you know, or whatever, and he's like running around with no diaper on. Like, this is life. It's like freedom, you know. I mean, this is what was going on. And they walk in, and they see this newly born king of the Jews, and they are compelled. Like, think about who they are. They have been servants of the highest king of the world. They have said, and they're his advisors. Like, the king comes to them for advice. These are important people, and they walk in and they see a toddler, infant Jesus, and they are just like hit their faces on the ground. He is the end of their search, and they worship him. And then they give the worst baby gifts ever. Like, have you seen, like, a baby doesn't know what to do with gold, right? I mean, it's like, don't put that in your mouth, Jesus, you know, or whatever. And then it's like, frankincense, he's over there smelling the essential oils and like the myrrh or whatever. Now, you can say this is gifts for a prophet, a priest, and a king. Like, you can talk about that. But really, these were gifts that they would give any king. This was the valuable stuff of the day. And so they bring their best to Jesus, and they lay it at his feet, and they worship him in an extravagant way. Now, here's where the unknown comes in. This seems like the high point of the story, right? Like, if I'm reading this and I'm writing the story, I kind of want it to end there. Like, this would be a great, like, they've had such a tough time. There was all this risk and all this craziness, and all their plans were being ruined at the start. And then they said, yes, God, let it be, whatever. And so they're faithful, and God blesses. And then the delivery is terrible. And they have all this stuff on the actual birth of Jesus, and it's crazy. But then there's like this bright moment. Well, now it's been 2 years, and there's this awesome sort of period in between of rest, but there's this high moment, and you sort of want it to end. But guess what? It doesn't. Because right around the corner, there are these fears. and these unknown things about what's going to happen. Now look at what it says. Verse 12. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. And so they're here, like they've had this journey. They've been ordered by the king of the country they're in. You come back here and you tell me where he is. And they have a choice. Are we going to obey the king, or are we not going to obey the king? Like, this king kills people. And they have this choice. Are we going to sort of be afraid and give in to fear? It's only 5 miles away. It's not like they can get a huge jump start on the king. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, oh, we'll lose them around the pass. Like, they're literally saying, okay, whatever happens to us, that's fine. Like, if we die, we've seen the king. If we die, we've seen the king over every king. If we die, we've had a chance to worship at the feet of the Savior. Like, it's worth it. It's all good. Listen, they had a choice to be afraid, or they could look at something different. Write this down. This can happen for you this year. Listen, whenever your plans are ruined, whenever there's legitimate reasons to actually be afraid, you have a choice where you look. You can look at your fears, or you can look to your Father. You can look at your fears, or you can look to your Father. Like, every time you have a choice. When the doctor comes in and he says, oh, this is your diagnosis. When your spouse comes in and says, look at our terrible marriage. Like, when your kids come in and it's craziness and chaos and they're starting to go on the wrong path and they're becoming these prodigal kids. Like, you have this choice. You can look at the things that you're afraid of, and guess what that's going to do? Produce more fear and more worry and more anxiety, and your control meter is going to go up. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? I got to fix this. I got to solve this. I got to do this. You know what we need to do? We need to have a tighter rein. Let's take away their phones. Let's do this. Let's make this happen. Let's just work harder. Let's earn more money. Let's do this thing, right? And it's like you get in this fear mindset. Well, quarantine, they're sick. Don't shake a hand. Don't ever do it, right? You know, it's like you're going to be sick. Do you know how bad that is? Sickness. Right? You know, and it's like, well, yeah, but you'll be fine in a day. Like, is it that big a deal? Right? But it happens, like, we get this control and this fear, and it drives us to this place of worry and anxiety, and it crushes us when we look at our fears. But if you take a zoom out and you say, instead of looking at the things that actually are legitimate and could cause me fear, I'm going to look to my Father, because he's the rescuer. He's the one who sends people dreams in the middle of the night. He's the one who says, hey, listen, I want to help you. He's the one who's there as peace and comfort. He's the one who gives direction. He's wisdom incarnate. He's the provider of everything. He is the rescuer. So I can look at my fears and I can be paralyzed, or I can look to my Father and find freedom even if things don't change. Listen, when I look at our landscape, especially for millennials, any millennials in the house? Any millennials? All right, yeah, listen, like millennial, when I look at them, that means that you're under 33, right? 33, 34, depends. All right, you're a millennial if that's you. When I look at this stuff, like, I want to tell you, I see people paralyzed by fear in a way that I've never seen in my lifetime, right? Like, it's unbelievable. There's so much fear and so much worry. And what's going to happen to my kid? And what's going to happen to my marriage? What's going to happen to this? And what if I get sick and all this? And listen, I want to tell you, if some of that stuff actually happened to you, it might be the best thing that ever happened in your life. Because you would see, I can't control it all. I can't make all this stuff happen. I can't micromanage and bubble my way into life in a way that prevents pain. Because guess what? It's coming. Pain will come for you one day. Like, you may make it till you're 50, but pain will come. You may keep your kid pain-free until they're 18, but guess what? The real world is going to be painful. And listen, whenever we have these fears, we can look at our fears and we can zero in and say, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And really freak out about things. Or we can look to our Father and say, he's the rescuer. He knows what's happening. He sees what it is. I can choose to zoom in on my fears, or I can choose to look to my Father. That's our choice. And they choose to look at the Father. And look at what happens. They go on their way. And the Lord rescues. Herod doesn't catch up with them. Now look at what happens. I love this. Verse 13. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. Remain there until I tell you, for Herod's about to search for the child to what? Destroy him. So Joseph, that same night, he gets woken up by a dream. Now, he can be paralyzed with fear, or he can go. Now, can you imagine? Like, this is They've got nothing. Like, what if you just were told in the middle of the night, all right, you need to go to Mexico tonight. Like, just go right now. Take what you've got. You got 30 minutes. Leave. What would you do? You're going to become a refugee. You got to sneak across the border. Like, you've got to get in there. And you got to be somebody who can't necessarily speak the language, whatever it might be. Like, this is Joseph. They're there. Joseph and Mary and the Christ child. It's like you're going to a foreign place. You can't just go to another town. You can't just go to another place. Like, you've got to go to Egypt. There was this Jewish community in Egypt. It was always a place where the Jews were able to run. This was a history that was prevalent there. And there's this Jewish community there, but they're going to be these refugees. And so he says, go. I want you to go. And Joseph decides in that moment, I can live in fear or I can just obey. And so he goes. He can look at his fears or he can look to his father. And so he's rescued. He's rescued in the middle of this. Now, this next passage of Scripture, I think, is one of the toughest ones. Look at what it says. Verse 14 and 15. We'll read through that quickly and get to this next part. Look at what it says. And he rose and he took the child and his mother by night. And he departed for Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, out of Egypt I'll call my son. Now look at what it says. What happens when God doesn't rescue, though? What happens when your fears come true? Like, does God always rescue? No, he doesn't. Like, there's times where God says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to keep you from this pain. I'm not going to keep you from this hardship. I'm not going to keep you from this tragedy. I'm not going to keep you from this wrecking your life. Like, there's times where God says yes, and he swoops down and he rescues us and picks us up. And there's other times where he says, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let this come. I'm going to let it ruin your plans. I'm going to let your kid stay a prodigal for a little while longer. I'm going to let you have the cancer, and I'm not going to heal you because you're going to come home to be with me. I'm going to let this marriage dissolve. I know you want it to work, but your spouse is not going to make it work. And so they're going to run away. There are times where God doesn't rescue. So what do you do then? What do you do? When your worst fears come totally true, what do you do? Well, you have another choice of how you look. Write this down. You can look at your pain, or you can look to the promise. You can look at your pain and zoom in on that. God, how did you let this happen? Why did my kid get taken away? God, how could you let this happen? They were in the prime of their life. Like, I know that you could have spoken a word and they would have been healed in that moment. How come you didn't? You can zoom in on your pain. Lord, why did they leave me? Why did they choose another person? God, why did this adultery happen? God, why did this sickness occur? How come I've got to have surgery? Like, you can zoom in on all of the pain. And if you sit there, do you know what will happen? You'll become so depressed and so bitter. And you'll look at God and say, why? You can zoom in on the pain, or you can look to the promise. And you say, well, David, what's the promise? Write this down. Here's the promise. When God doesn't rescue, he always redeems. If he says no to the rescue, you can always count on the promise that he will redeem whatever happens in your life. Even the worst thing, even when it's painful, even when it's somebody else meaning something for evil against you, God can take all that. He's that powerful, and he can flip it on its head and turn it around so that it's redemption. He can turn it around, and he can grow you through the worst hardship. He can turn it around and say, you know what, instead of healing, you're going to walk through this hardship, and you know what, you're going to come out the other side stronger and more refined and more like Jesus, because you would have never learned patience if I didn't give you this really difficult child in your life. Like, Lord, could you just make my kid not a strong-willed child? Like, I'd really love that. Could you just, like, make them really compliant and easy, right? And he says, no. Well, if God doesn't rescue, he redeems. He says, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to teach you patience through this strong-willed child. And guess what? They're going to be an amazing leader for me one day. Right? Well, you say, well, what about my health? Like, I'm praying for God to rescue. That's an awesome prayer. Sometimes God says yes, and sometimes God says no. Like, I prayed that the Lord would rescue me out of some health stuff this year, and sometimes he has, and sometimes he totally hasn't. But whenever he hasn't, he always redeems it. He always uses it in my life to help me grow, to help encourage somebody else. Oh, well, if David's going through that, he's got faith. Like, I can go through what I'm going through and have faith, right? Like, he always redeems. Now look at this story. This is one of the saddest parts where they don't get the dream. They don't get the warning. They do have tragedy happen in their lives because men have free will. And sometimes that free will is allowed to be expressed through acts of evil. And look at what Herod does. Verse 16, then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he became furious. He sent and he killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old and under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. This fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they were no more. In the middle of this time, like, there's this pain and there's this tragedy. And they have this choice. Am I going to zoom in and look at my pain and look at my tragedy and say, what is going on? Or am I going to, in the middle of the pain, look for the promise? God, you can take even the worst thing and you can bring redemption. Scholars tell us that Bethlehem was a really small, but this could have affected maybe 24 families. 24 families that they don't get the vision in the middle of the night. And Jesus is going down to Egypt and they're still sleeping. And Herod comes and swoops in with his men and ends up killing maybe 24 kids. What a tragedy. In the middle of that moment, it's really hard to think about that and say, well, God, how did you permit this to happen? You can look at the pain of it, or you can say, I'm going to look to the promise. God, even in the middle of this hellacious act where people bring tragedy, Lord, you can bring hope out of it. You can bring renewal out of it. Listen, there's some of you this year that you're going to experience some pain. And you can do all you can to avoid it. You can pray it. You can believe that God's the rescuer, and he is. But there's times where he says no. And if you have to walk through that, you can choose to look at your pain, or you can choose to look to the promise that whenever God doesn't rescue, he always redeems. And you can trust him in that. You can trust him. Listen, this year, let me just ask you, as you look towards 2018, can you believe it's 2018? Any of you still remember like Y2K? We're going to lose all our computers. It's not going to work. What are we going to do, right? You know, it's just like you had to buy a new one. And I think the computer companies were behind it. It's like, listen, it's 2018. Can you believe it? And there's going to be some amazing, look right here, some amazing things are going to happen for you this year. God's got some amazing plans for you. Do you believe that? I do. He's got some amazing plans for you. But look at me. There's also going to be reasons to fear. You're going to encounter stuff at your work, or stuff in the economy, or stuff with your job, or stuff with your finances, stuff with your health, stuff with your kids, stuff with your marriage, stuff with your grandkids. Look at me. You're going to encounter legitimate reasons to fear. And you have a choice. Am I going to look at my fears or look to my Father? Am I going to look at all these things and what if, and oh my gosh. Or am I going to look at the Father and say, I trust you. You're the rescuer. You're the healer. You're the provider. You're the protector. You're the restorer. You're the one who can do it. And even if you don't, I know that you'll redeem it. Listen, I want to tell you, some of the worst times in my life have been the absolute, bar none, biggest times of growth in my life ever. When you go through cancer, or when you lose a loved one, when you lose a child, when you go through health stuff of your own and you realize how utterly powerless you are. Like, do you know your life can turn like that? Some of you will walk through it. You walk through some of the worst pain. I want to tell you, in the middle of that furnace is not fun, is it? It's not fun. And you can zoom in on the pain and you can say, poor me, why don't I get to do this? Poor me, how could this happen? Lord, why is this going on? You can zoom in on the pain. And there's a time for that. There's a time to grieve. Or you can look to the promise. God, I don't know how you're going to do it, but you're going to bring good out of this. I don't know how you're going to do it, but I can't wait to see it. God, if you didn't rescue, you're going to bring good. So I'm just trusting you. You're going to redeem this. You're going to redeem my marriage this way. You're going to redeem my story this way. You're going to redeem my kids this way. You're going to redeem my health struggle this way. You're going to redeem my finances this way. Whatever it is, God, instead of looking and zooming in on the pain, I'm looking to the promise of your redemption. And listen, it's going to be so worth it. All the pain and all the hardship will be worth it because you get to see the redemption of God. Let's pray. There's some of you in the house today that you're sort of like Herod. And if you're really honest with yourself, you want to be in control of your life. You're willing to do whatever it takes to maintain that control. But I want to tell you, we make terrible gods. I think it's so interesting. You have this Jewish king who had access to all the scriptures. And his goal is to maintain his power. And then you have these pagan guys who have no access to the scripture at all. But God uses a star to convert them. And they come and they bow on their face before the toddler king in worship. This morning, I want to tell you that Jesus came to pay for your sins and mine on the cross. He didn't just beat sin, he beat death, hell, and the grave. He's risen, he's alive. The Bible says that he's Lord over it all. You're not Lord even of your own life. So how silly is it for you to sit on the throne, trying to control it all? Listen, if you never surrendered to him, this is your moment. Step off the throne of your own life because you never deserved to be there. Surrender to the King over every king, the Lord of all lords, your Savior. Say, God, I just surrender. Just tell him, I surrender. I surrender. Your King, not me. Your King, not me. There's some of you that just prayed that. I just want to celebrate with you by sending you a book this week. Just fill out that response card, put your name and address, and put a check mark in the top box that says, I prayed to receive Christ. I'm going to send you a book in the mail about what you do now, that you've started this walk with him. But there are others of you in the house that you're sort of nervous about what's going to happen in the new year. Listen, I just want to tell you, there are going to be some things that you legitimately can fear, but you don't have to be afraid. It's hard to worship the Lord over everything and feel fear about your circumstances. It's hard to worship the King who's over every situation in your life, who has the power to rescue, and if he chooses not to rescue, he promises he will redeem it because he loves you and you love him. It's hard to worship that King and live a life in fear. So this year, are you focusing in on your fears? Are you looking at your fears? Or are you looking to your Father? Some of you, you've already been through the crucible. You've already been through that fiery furnace. You're walking in the midst of pain right now. Listen, you can focus in on the pain or you can look to the promise. God, how are you going to redeem this? Only you could do that. Only you could redeem this wreck that's happened in my life. Listen, God never leaves your life in ruins. He's always planning to rebuild. And some of you just need to say, instead of locking eyes on my pain, I'm looking to the promise of your redemption. How are you going to bring good out of this, God? I can't wait to see it. God, I just pray you'd set people free from fear today. That in the midst of pain, we would look to your promise of redemption.